some extent.
To some extent, yes.
Oh.
Because looking at the whole scenario, I mean, we haven't really, or he hasn't really, been specific. Neither the National Assembly has been very specific when we're talking about this age consent. Now,
with respect to renunciation of citizenship.
Yes, that's right.
Not with respect to the Islamic law or the customary law or marriage, because Child Rights Act is also there.
It's also there, right. Now, as far as I'm concerned, you say, because I'm well informed, and I think I wouldn't just be saying something that I'm not quite aware of. What we actually understand that this country goes by when it comes to the child marriage issue is 18 years old. And I'll actually tell you that this is what I'm talking about is actually right. Nigeria signed the Child Rights Convention in 1990, ratified it in 1991 without reservations. They also signed the African Convention on Human and People's Rights in 1982 and ratified it in 1983. Nigeria also signed African Charter on the Rights of Women and Children in 1999, ratified it in 2001. Finally, they signed the Maputo Protocol in 2003, ratified it in 2004. All these international laws contain provisions that requires Nigeria to put the age of marriage at 18 years. I think that settles it. Because if we've, not just the UN, globally, all the treaties that actually concerns child marriage, Nigeria happens to be a member of it, of that body.
Yeah, but you talked about the crucial aspect of domesticating it.
Yeah. It couldn't be domesticated.
Because it's one thing to sign.
Yeah.
It's another to domesticate it.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, the question is, why would you want to be part of something and you wouldn't want to practice it?
So that's the issue.
That's the issue. So we should be looking into all these things because, you see, it's gone past those days or those ages whereby somebody would just come and say, you are James on paper, but physically you're John. No.
Okay. Because, I mean, comments are also coming through here. Salim Audu says there is no verse like that in the Quran. I challenge Yorema to quote it exactly. Also buttressing your point earlier. But the thing about this is this, which I've heard lawyers, say here time and again. It looks tricky because if you're talking about the Child Rights Act, if we're talking about the Islamic law, if we're talking about the customary law, which all have their stipulations about the age, the marriageable age, and the National Assembly cannot legislate on that. So, don't we find ourselves in a mix? Because the part that started off all of this has absolutely nothing to do with child marriage in the first place. So, it means all of these laws have been there previously, and lots of lawyers are in this country. And lots of groups, civil society groups are in this country as we speak, and more will be. And no one has pushed or raised this matter until it came up in the Senate, or pardon me, if they have, maybe not as strongly as they ought to. So here we find ourselves in a quagmire.
I believe strongly that after yesterday and after today, you will begin to see the outpour of various interpretations.
What would you like them to address in the midst of all of this controversy?
What we've actually ascribed to as a nation, which is 18 years of age.
What happens to if the customary law or the Islamic law says, well, 15 or 16?
We have an option. We say, as a nation, as a democratic nation, we have an option to say, okay, our constitution says, whatever, 15, 16, whatsoever, we have to opt out from the treaty that we signed. Now, but as long as we're still part of the treaty that we signed, what we actually consented to, then of course we have to go by those treaties. Not say, now, the issue we're having here now is the National Assembly should look critically, you see, because it's becoming complicated. You cannot be part of a global body and come back home domestically and saying you have a different law or different charter.
What about the state assemblies? Don't you see any role for them in all of this? Because If the National Assembly says, well, all those laws, the states have got to do something first before we come in.
The state have the power to do, I think the states have a huge role to play in this, because obviously you can, for example, in Lagos, for example, I mean, they have laws that actually legislates and bring up the LASMA, for example, and some other organizations that actually they don't have on the federal level. So I believe individual states could begin to work within the individual legal framework and begin to make their own interpretation of it. Because I believe a state could actually legislate on this issue, even though the National Assembly are saying something different.
Okay. How do you think, because one of the things a host of people think is not happening is that there's no pressure being applied to the states. A host of these things will go on unchecked because people get married at a local level. And there's really nothing anybody can do about it. How do you think we should apply pressure on the state governments, to do what they need to do to prevent at least cases, if not for any reason at all, for biological reasons, the fact that we have, many cases of VVF.
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, I think going forward now, we will begin to see a lot of individual group, NGOs springing up, begin to talk about this. Because if we're talking about advocating for tackling unemployment, good health, child poverty eradication, and so on and so forth, these are one of the main causes. Because if we want to really be serious about tackling all these issues, then we have to look into it. Because if a 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old gets into marriage, number one, you deprive that child of a sound education, a proper health, sanity, quite a lot of things. And the development of that child, it's been tattered. So if this goes on and continue, it will not just affect whichever part of the country is saying they're practicing that law, but it will eventually affect all of us nationwide. So if we're really serious economically and to develop our nation, this is one of the very strong issues that we should begin to advocate for and make sure that we look into it critically and resolve this issue once and for all.
All right, then Michael Adeleye, a public affairs analyst, thank you very much indeed for coming on this morning.
My pleasure.